When the heart is desperate, even pride must kneel. Tessa used to believe she was tough. Not gym membership or protein shake tough, but the kind of tough you earn from adulthood, punching you in the face repeatedly until you start punching back. She thought she could handle anything: rent, side jobs, insults from cranky customers, even waking up every day to a life that wasn't quite the one she had imagined. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the sound of monitors beeping out a slow countdown of her mother's life. Hospitals always smelled like disinfectant and quiet heartbreak. Today, that smell seemed stronger. Tessa sat outside the ICU with her tote bag dangling off her wrist like a tired child. She had paint stains on her jeans, ink smudged on her fingers, and exhaustion stamped across her face. The hallway light flickered above her, because of course it did. Life loved dramatic timing. She checked her banking apps again, as if a miracle deposit might suddenly appear. It didn't. $22,000. She needed $500,000. Her breath hitched. Her mother, a woman who had survived everything life threw at her, except her own aging heart, was lying behind a glass wall hooked up to machines that hissed and beeped like they were arguing with each other. Tessa pressed her palm against the cold surface, hoping her warmth could travel through. "Hang in there," she whispered. "I'm not giving up. I promise." She meant it. She always meant it. The problem was, life didn't care. The doctor's voice echoed in her head. "We have weeks, not months, and insurance has rejected the claim again." Pre-existing condition, the world's most useless phrase. Tessa had cried only once 2 nights ago. A 5-minute meltdown in a bathroom stall between her cafe shift and her painting lesson. After that, she'd gone numb. Tears weren't productive. Tears didn't pay bills. Tears didn't save lives. She worked 3 jobs: art teacher by day, cafe worker at night, freelance designer on weekends. She slept maybe 4 hours on a good night. On a bad night, she didn't sleep at all. But none of it was enough. Her phone buzzed. Amanda. Of course, Amanda was a paralegal, with a voice that always sounded like she was announcing someone's death or reading out a court sentence, which today, strangely enough, might be fitting. Tessa picked up. "Please tell me you're calling with good news." "Well," Amanda hesitated. "Good news is a strong phrase. Let's call it alternative news." "That sounds illegal." "It's not illegal," Amanda whispered quickly. "Just insane. Comforting. Tessa, one of our top clients is looking for a please don't hang up contract marriage." Tessa blinked. "A what?" "A contract marriage. 1 year, strictly business. No romance, no strings, no personal stuff." "That's Amanda. Do you realize how bizarre that sounds?" "Yes, but listen to the rest." Tessa pressed the phone tighter. "Go on." "The payment is $500,000. Silence. Her heart stopped, blinked, and then restarted in the wrong rhythm. 500,000. Yes. For a 1-year marriage. Yes. Tessa rubbed her forehead. "That's prostitution, with extra paperwork." "It's not prostitution," Amanda hissed. "It's contractual companionship." "That's worse." Amanda sighed. "Tessa, I know it's insane. I know it sounds like the beginning of a bad Netflix drama, but your mom needs the surgery, and this guy, he can pay for it without blinking." "What guy?" "A tech billionaire." Tessa nearly dropped her phone. "A what?" "A tech billionaire," Amanda repeated, "as in the youngest CEO in the city's history, rumored to be part genius, part robot, part ice cube. You know, the usual billionaire starter pack." "This keeps getting better," Tessa muttered. "He wants a wife for a year, for business optics, negotiations, whatever. He doesn't date, doesn't socialize, doesn't smile. Basically a human winter." "Wow," Tessa said dryly. "Sign me up. Just meet him," Amanda pleaded. "If you hate him, walk away, but at least hear the offer." Tessa looked at her mother again. pale, fragile, fading beneath harsh hospital light. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll meet him." The next morning, Tessa stood in front of the tallest building she had ever seen, a skyscraper made entirely of glass and steel, like an icicle the size of a mountain, stabbing the sky. "Rich people and their architecture," she muttered. "Show-offs." She pushed open the giant revolving doors and stepped inside, into a lobby that looked like heaven had hired an interior designer. Everything glowed, probably even the dust particles. The receptionist, beautiful, polished and terrifyingly perfect, smiled with the warmth of a snowstorm. "Name?" she asked. "Tessa," she answered, then cleared her throat. "Tessa Hart." "Purpose of visit?" "To meet the CEO," she said, and suddenly felt ridiculous. "Of course, he's expecting you. Take." The elevator was made of glass, because apparently what people really needed when they were about to make life-altering decisions was a panoramic view of how far they could fall. When she reached the top floor, another assistant guided her into a reception area that felt like it cost more than her entire life savings. "Tessa, he'll see you now," she swallowed. "Here goes nothing." The office was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire city, turning the skyline into a painting. And there, standing by the glass like a king surveying his kingdom, was Adrian Frost. The man looked like he'd been sculpted out of expensive marble. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, and grey eyes so cold they could probably freeze a volcano. He didn't turn, not even a glance. Tessa waited, and waited, and waited. Finally he shifted his gaze just slightly, enough to acknowledge her presence. "Sit," he said. He didn't ask, he commanded. She sat. He walked to his desk with the same energy someone might use approaching a computer virus. Annoyed, detached, mildly disgusted. Without preamble, he slid a document toward her. "Terms." "That's fast," she said. "It's a contract, not a date." She stared at him. "Don't you at least want to, I don't know, talk?" "No." "Why?" "Talking leads to questions, and questions are bad," she asked, eyebrows lifting. "Personal questions are explicitly against the contract." "Oh, that's extremely normal," she muttered. "Indeed." She dropped her gaze to the document. 1 year of marriage, separate rooms, public appearances as needed, no intimacy, no emotions, no expectations, a very romantic list. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said flatly. "Why me?" she blurted. He didn't even blink. "Personal question." "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes. "Why marriage? Business optics. That sounds vague." "That's intentional. You're really committed to being mysterious, huh?" "I prefer efficient." She stared at the contract. He stared at her, like she was a broken appliance he wasn't sure was worth repairing. Her mother's life flashed in her mind. The monitors, the deadline, the fear, $500,000, right there, in reach, if she signed. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but desperation pressed her down into the chair. She signed. Adrian barely reacted. He wrote a check for $500,000, slid it across the table toward her, and said, "The courthouse ceremony will be next week. Bring a witness. Mrs. Patterson will arrange your move." "You're not staying for the conversation about feelings?" she asked, weakly. "No, didn't think so." "Good," he replied. "You sound relieved." "I am." He dismissed her with a nod. No handshake, no smile, nothing. She walked out of the building feeling like she'd just sold her soul to the coldest man alive. But her mother would live. That was what mattered. The surgery day arrived fast, too fast. Tessa stood in the observation room, watching as doctors moved around her unconscious mother. Machines beeped. Tubes ran everywhere. Her heart pounded harder than any monitor in the room. She whispered prayers into her sleeve. Small, shaky, desperate prayers. 8 hours. 8 endless hours. She paced until her legs ached, sat until her spine screamed, stared so hard at the swinging doors that they blurred in front of her. When the doctor finally walked into the waiting room, Tessa braced herself for the worst. "She made it," he said. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Her knees gave way, and she dropped into the nearest chair, then slid forward, elbows on her thighs, face in her hands, as the tears broke free. Ugly crying, the kind where you hiccup and can't breathe properly and don't care who's watching. Her mother would live. That was all that mattered. Every compromise, every insane decision, every signature on that contract, it all became bearable in that moment. She stayed at the hospital until the nurses practically forced her to go home and sleep. But there was no normal going home anymore. 3 days later, Tessa stood in a courthouse that smelled like old paper, dry ink, and boredom. The fluorescent lights hummed like they were in on the joke. Adrian arrived exactly on time, looking painfully sharp in a grey suit. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He didn't even compliment her simple blue dress, which she'd hoped would at least get a nod. Amanda stood as her witness, leaning over every few minutes to whisper, "Girl, what are we doing?" as if Tessa had the answer. The judge read the vows. Adrian repeated them with all the enthusiasm of someone reading out loud from a technical manual. "You may kiss the bride," the judge said. "We'll skip that," Adrian replied immediately. "Yes, thank you," Tessa added, a little too quickly. The judge blinked, then cleared his throat. "All right then, you may shake hands." Adrian extended his hand. Tessa took it. The handshake was stiff, businesslike, painfully awkward. "Romantic," she muttered under her breath. "Contractual," he replied. He left immediately afterward, citing work, as if he had just dropped off a signed package at a courier office. Amanda stared after him. "You married a man who treated the wedding like a dentist appointment." "I know," Tessa whispered. "Let's just pretend none of this happened." "Too late," Amanda said, glancing at the ring. "Your finger disagrees." The next day she moved into his mansion, the most intimidating house she had ever seen. It was modern, symmetrical, and so silent it felt like sound was afraid to live there. The kind of place where you felt guilty for breathing too loudly. The only warm thing in the entire house was the housekeeper. Mrs. Patterson was a soft, sweet woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She carried the gentle warmth of someone's favorite grandmother and the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen everything and survived it. She led Tessa through the mansion like a guide in a museum. "This is your suite," she said, opening a door into a large lavender-decorated room that looked like a luxury spa had decided to move in permanently. Tessa stepped inside, her mouth dropping slightly. "Wow, lavender. My favorite." "Yes," Mrs. Patterson replied with a smile. "Frost insisted on it." Tessa turned. "He insisted on my favorite color?" "Yes." "How did he know?" Mrs. Patterson's smile deepened, soft and knowing. "He notices things." "Like what?" "More than you think," the older woman replied, and left it at that. Tessa stared at the color palette. Every shade, every detail, these were not random choices. The bedding, the curtains, even the candles on the dresser. This wasn't some generic rich person neutral room. Someone had designed this for her, but she shook the thought away. Coincidence? It had to be. The first days of marriage were exactly what she expected. Lonely. Adrian left before sunrise and returned after dark. On the rare occasions they ate dinner together, he sat at the opposite end of the long dining table, like they were reenacting a scene from a Victorian drama. "So, how was work?" she asked, one night, breaking the heavy silence. "Productive," he answered, without looking up from his tablet. "Cool," she said, stabbing her mashed potatoes. He glanced up once. "You?" "My mom is recovering. I'm tired. I spilled coffee on myself." "Twice. Unfortunate," he said. That's one word for it. He nodded and went back to his screen, the glow from the tablet making his features look even sharper. She visited her mother every morning, then returned home to paint in the garden. The flowers there caught the light beautifully. It was the only peaceful part of her day, the only time she felt like herself instead of Mrs. Frost, contract wife. Then things started happening. Small things, strange things. Her favorite Ethiopian coffee blend, one she only ever mentioned to Amanda, appeared in her room every morning, brewed perfectly, the aroma wrapping around her like a hug. New art supplies arrived at her door, exactly the brand she used, but never could afford in bulk. Books she had once admired online, but never purchased, showed up on her shelves. And once, while painting in the garden, she felt eyes on her. She looked up. There he was, Adrian Frost, standing at his office window, watching her, silent, still, unreadable. The second their eyes met, he stepped back into the shadows and vanished. Her heart did a somersault. It had no right doing. Later, Mrs. Patterson hinted gently over tea. "Mr. Frost is more observant than he appears, dear." Yeah, no kidding. But none of this changed the truth. Tessa had sold herself to a billionaire to save her mother. Now she was living in his house, sleeping under his roof, drinking coffee he somehow knew she loved, but she didn't know why. And she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Not yet. But it was coming, faster than she expected. For most people, skyscrapers were just tall buildings. For Tessa, Frost Industries felt like a monument built to intimidate the average human into silence. And honestly, it was doing a great job. The week after she moved into the mansion, she was summoned back to Adrian's headquarters for documentation updates. She wasn't sure what that meant, but judging from the tone in the assistant's email, it involved either legal signatures or a small sacrifice of her soul. She wore a simple white blouse, black jeans, and the best confidence she could fake. Inside, her heart was doing gymnastics. The building greeted her with its usual combination of silence, expensive air conditioning, and emotional coldness. The receptionist smiled at her with the same robotic warmth as before. "Mrs. Frost," the woman greeted. It still felt foreign. Mrs. Frost. She had a husband. A billionaire husband. A billionaire robot husband. The elevator shot her upward like a very expensive rocket, and she stepped onto the top floor, where the assistant guided her into the waiting area. "Tessa, he'll see you shortly." Shortly apparently meant after he finishes intimidating 3 grown men into near tears, because when the office door finally opened, 3 executives emerged, looking like they had just survived a natural disaster. When the room cleared, the assistant nodded. "You can go in now." She entered. Adrian stood exactly where he had the first time she met him, beside the towering windows, overlooking the city, like the world was an equation he intended to solve. He didn't greet her. He didn't turn. He didn't blink. "Sit," he said. Tessa sat. She scanned the office for any sign of warmth. A plant, a family photo, a mug that said "World's okayest boss." Nothing. The man lived like Apple's minimalist headquarters, had a baby with Antarctica. He walked to his desk, opened a folder, and pushed a stack of documents toward her. "It's the remainder of your integration paperwork," he said. "Integration," she echoed. "Am I becoming part of your operating system?" "Essentially." Her left eye twitched. "You're joking." "No, of course he wasn't." She flipped through the stack. "This paperwork could kill someone." "Most people find it manageable," he replied. "Most people haven't worked 3 jobs and lived on instant noodles. Instant noodles are inefficient. That is not the point." His gaze didn't waver. "Then what is?" She stared at him. "That your sense of humor is as dry as this pen." He blinked slowly, as if genuinely considering whether he should be offended. She began signing line after line, her hand cramping halfway through. His gaze followed her movements, calm, focused, intense, like he was watching someone defuse a bomb. So, she said, unable to bear the silence. This is your whole life? Work, paperwork, intimidation, repeat? No. Of course, he didn't elaborate. Okay, she tried again. So what do you do for fun? He paused. A long pause. The kind of pause that suggested he was scrolling through a mental dictionary looking up the word fun. Finally, he said, work. She exhaled dramatically. Wow, how thrilling. Sarcasm is unnecessary, he said. But so easy, she muttered. She signed the last page, pushed the folder back toward him, and flexed her cramped fingers. When do I start? She asked. You've already started. That sounds ominous. It is not. He stood, closing the distance between them with deliberate, measured steps. He didn't touch her. He barely looked at her, but his presence was strong enough to short-circuit her thoughts. You will attend a board dinner next week, he said. Public optics require it. Optics, she repeated. Of course they do. You'll be introduced as my wife. Nothing more. Nothing more. The words landed in her chest heavier than they should have. She nodded anyway. Okay, I can do that. And he added, you'll need something appropriate to wear. Mrs. Patterson will coordinate. Appropriate, she echoed. Right. Does that mean elegant or something waterproof in case of emotional storms? He didn't answer that. He only gave a single clean nod. No goodbye, no small talk, just termination of conversation. She left the building feeling like she'd spent an hour inside a freezer that occasionally spoke in full sentences. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Patterson waited in the hallway with a warm smile and a tray of lemon cookies. The housekeeper had a theory. Lemon cookies solved everything. Given Tessa's current life, she wasn't inclined to argue. Tessa, dear, the older woman said, we have a lot to prepare for the dinner. That sounds frightening, Tessa replied. It is, Mrs. Patterson said cheerfully, but we'll make sure you look like you know what you're doing. That's impossible. We'll try anyway. The housekeeper led her into a room she hadn't seen before. Racks of dresses lined the walls, floor-length gowns, elegant silhouettes, fabrics that looked like they'd been spun from moonlight and whispered over by angels. Tessa stared. This is the boutique. It's your wardrobe, Mrs. Patterson corrected gently. My what? Mr. Frost had these brought in after your wedding. Why? Tessa blurted. He barely looked at me. That doesn't mean he didn't pay attention, Mrs. Patterson replied. Tessa opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw it. A black dress, simple cut, elegant, soft fabric, minimalist, exactly her style, not the billionaire's trophy wife style, her style. She lifted it from the rack, the fabric sliding cool and soft over her fingers. This is perfect, she whispered. Yes, Mrs. Patterson said. He was quite particular about that one. Tessa's breath caught. Why? Why would a man who barely glanced at her choose a dress that felt like it had been picked by someone who knew her well? The question lingered in her chest, unanswered. The night of the dinner came fast, too fast. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline of the black dress. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her makeup was soft and natural. She looked grown, composed, almost elegant, almost. Her stomach, however, was doing cartwheels. She took a deep breath and walked downstairs. Adrian was waiting in the foyer. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and for the first time his expression wasn't a perfectly blank mask. His grey eyes swept over her, slow, deliberate, from her hair to the line of her dress, to the way her hands clutched the small clutch. Mrs. Patterson had insisted she take. Something flickered in his gaze, something warm, something startled, something human. You look appropriate, he said. Tessa blinked. Thanks. That was enthusiastic. It was a compliment, he replied. I could barely tell. I do not exaggerate, he said simply. Clearly, she muttered. He didn't react, but his eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he stepped forward and offered his arm. She hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on it. His arm tensed, just slightly. She felt it, he felt her feel it, and then they both pretended nothing had happened. Minor. The board dinner was a crash course in rich people behavior. There were smiles that didn't reach eyes, handshakes that felt more like negotiations, laughter that was too loud, too quick, too performative. People laughed at things that weren't remotely funny, simply because the person talking owned a company or three. Tessa smiled. She nodded. She pretended to understand a conversation about international tech infrastructure and blockchain integration. She did not, but she had spent years dealing with difficult customers at the cafe. Pretending to follow along with nonsense was practically a survival skill. Everyone wanted to meet the wife. Rumors had floated around for years that Adrian Frost was unmeltable. Seeing him with a woman on his arm was equivalent to witnessing a polar bear order hot chocolate. "So you're the one who cracked the Frost King," one board member drawled, leaning a little too close, wine swirling in his glass. Tessa blinked. "Cracked? I didn't even dent him." A few people laughed. Adrian's jaw tightened. She felt it before she saw it. His hand at the small of her back, warm, steady, possessive. The board member smirked. "That's quite a woman you've got, Frost." "Yes," Adrian said. "Who would have thought you'd marry?" "Finish that sentence carefully." Adrian cut in, his voice suddenly dangerous. The other man swallowed. "Such a charming lady." "Better," Adrian replied. The room went quiet in an instant. People suddenly discovered deep spiritual connections with their wine glasses. Tessa nearly choked on air. Was he defending her? The rest of the evening passed in a daze of handshakes, introductions, and half-heard conversations. All the while, Adrian's hand remained at the small of her back, a constant reminder that he was there, not just beside her, behind her. They left early, in the car. Silence settled thick between them, heavy but not suffocating. "You didn't have to threaten that man," Tessa said finally, staring out at the passing city lights. "He was disrespectful," Adrian replied. "He was drunk." "Drunk people are still responsible for their mouths." She turned her head slightly. "Do you always scare people?" "Only when necessary." "Was it necessary tonight?" He glanced at her, grey eyes unreadable. "Yes." Her heart thumped harder than it should have at that simple answer. She turned back to the window, hoping the darkness outside hid the warmth creeping up her neck. The next morning, something strange happened. She woke to a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, no O'Neill was there, but a tray sat on the small table inside. Coffee, fresh croissants, and a folded note. She picked it up. "The cafe blend you prefer was unavailable. This one is similar." Her chest tightened. He had noticed. The sound hit first, screeching tires, a distant gasp from someone on the sidewalk. Tessa froze, every muscle in her body locking up. Her brain screamed move, but her legs refused. Then something slammed into her waist and yanked her backward so hard the world blurred. She stumbled, collided with a solid chest, and went down in a tangle of limbs. Her shoulder hit the pavement, but the impact was softened by the body behind her. She smelled cedar and clean soap and expensive suit fabric. For a moment, she thought she had actually died and landed in some weird high-budget afterlife. Then, a familiar voice, rawer than she'd ever heard it, cut through the haze. "Tessa, look at me. Are you hurt?" She blinked up into grey eyes she knew too well. Adrian. He wasn't calm. He wasn't controlled. He wasn't the composed CEO who signed contracts like he was signing weather reports. He looked terrified. His hands were on her shoulders, then running down her arms, checking for injuries with a desperation that made her chest ache. "Tessa, are you hurt?" he repeated, voice shaking. No, I don't think so, she managed. He glanced over her quickly, then back toward the street, jaw clenched so tight she thought it might crack. The car was already gone, disappearing into traffic, leaving behind only the echo of its screeching exit. Adrian's attention returned to her instantly. "Can you stand?" she nodded, even though her legs felt like jelly. He helped her up carefully, one hand firm at her elbow, the other hovering near her back, like he was ready to catch her again. Her heart was pounding, part adrenaline, part fear, part something else. Something she didn't want to name. What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "My driver follows you," he said. The words were so blunt, she thought she'd misheard. "Your driver what? Follows you?" he repeated, still scanning her like he didn't quite believe she was in one piece. "For security." "For security," she echoed. "You have someone follow me everywhere I go." "Yes." "Why?" His jaw tightened. For a second, she saw that same inner struggle in his eyes, the push-pull between saying nothing and saying too much. "Because you're my wife," he said finally. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Not flat, not bored, not transactional. There was weight there, possession, almost fear. He walked her all the way back to the car, waiting near the curb. The driver practically melted into the background as Adrian opened the door for her himself, one hand still hovering like he didn't quite trust the world not to slam into her again. The whole ride home, Tessa sat in stunned silence, watching him from the corner of her eye. He stared straight ahead, fists clenched, shoulders tense. He looked like a man who'd just seen his worst nightmare brush past reality. And the question that had been quietly growing inside her now roared. This wasn't normal, not for a man who insisted their marriage was nothing more. Something else was going on. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her lavender room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every strange detail of the past months in her head. The way he'd defended her at the board dinner, the coffee, the wardrobe, the room designed exactly to her taste, the near accident, the panic in his voice, the way he said, "Because you're my wife," like it meant everything. It didn't add up, unless he cared, unless he had cared for a long time. The thought made her heart race and her stomach twist in equal measure. Finally, sometime past midnight, she threw off the covers and padded barefoot down the hallway. The house was quiet, the kind of deep, layered silence that only existed in very large, very rich homes. She followed the faint glow she knew. Well now, Mrs. Patterson and her midnight tea. The housekeeper sat at the kitchen table with a mug in hand and a novel open in front of her. She looked up immediately when Tessa entered, eyes softening at the sight of her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Tessa shook her head and managed a small, shaky laugh. "Apparently, almost dying in a crosswalk is not relaxing." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Patterson breathed, standing at once. "You gave us all a fright today." "Os," Tessa repeated. "So he told you." "He didn't have to," the older woman said. "I saw his face when he brought you home." That made Tessa pause. "His face," Mrs. Patterson just gestured toward a chair. "Sit, sit, I'll make you tea." "I don't want tea," Tessa murmured, then caught herself. "Actually, no, that's a lie. I always want tea." A few minutes later, they were both seated at the table, mugs in front of them, steam curling between them like a bridge. Tessa stared into her drink for a moment, then spoke quietly. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "I will," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "If it's mine to tell," Tessa swallowed. "I don't think any of this is random. The coffee, the books, the room, the dress, the fact that your boss appears out of nowhere to pull me out of the path of a car." Mrs. Patterson said nothing, but her gaze didn't waver. I think, Tessa continued, her voice trembling, Adrian knew me long before our contract. The words sat between them, heavy and electric. Mrs. Patterson sighed, a sound full of years and secrets. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Tessa's. Yes, she said quietly. He did. The room seemed to tilt. Tessa's fingers tightened around her mug. How long? She asked. 2 years, Mrs. Patterson replied. Tessa stared at her. 2 years, maybe a little more, the housekeeper added. He never gave me an exact day, but I know when everything changed. Changed, Tessa whispered. Mrs. Patterson took a breath and glanced toward the doorway, as if checking that no one else stood there listening. Mr. Frost does not believe in accidents, she said. He likes numbers, data, logic, things that make sense. For most of his life, people were problems to manage, not people to care for. That tracks, Tessa muttered. But then, Mrs. Patterson continued. There was a night he came home from a business dinner, late, very upset. More unsettled than I'd ever seen him, without a financial crisis attached. What happened that night? He'd gone to a restaurant downtown, she said. There was an art gallery next door, a small one of those places where young artists show their work for the first time. He told me he only went in because he had time to kill before his clients arrived. Tessa's heart started pounding again. Her mind flashed back. Her very first small exhibition, the little gallery, with bad lighting and shaky labels, the way she'd talked to anyone who would listen about her pieces. He said, Mrs. Patterson went on, eyes soft and far away now, that he heard your voice before he saw you, talking about your painting, about how you used color to make sense of pain, how you believed art could turn something broken into something worth looking at. Tessa's throat closed. He watched you from the back of the room, the older woman said. You had no idea he was there. You were busy explaining your work to an older couple. He stood there for nearly an hour. He didn't speak to anyone, just watched and listened. And for the first time in the years I'd known him, he came home. She searched for a word. Changed. Tessa's eyes stung. How? He was quieter, which is impressive, given he was already a man of 5 words. Mrs. Patterson smiled a little sadly. He asked about art, about galleries, about how exhibitions work. He had his assistant find out your name, where you lived, where you worked. Tessa's voice came out barely above a whisper. He bought 3 of your paintings that night. Mrs. Patterson added, anonymously. He had them delivered here and hung them in his private study. Her heartbeat roared in her ears now. He has my paintings here. Yes, dear, she said softly, in a room only he uses. I dust them once a week. Tessa laughed, but it came out broken. This is insane. He doesn't do things halfway. Mrs. Patterson agreed. What about my mum? Tessa asked. How did he even find out she was sick? He keeps watch, Mrs. Patterson said carefully. He had his assistant check in on your progress from time to time, quietly. No interference, just information. When your mother was hospitalized, it came across his desk, along with the cost, the insurance denial, the time pressure. Tessa stared at her in disbelief. So the contract, the marriage, that was his idea because he knew you, Mrs. Patterson said. At least as much as a man can from watching, listening and learning. He knew you'd never accept a handout, that you'd rather drown than feel like a charity case. So he made it transactional, a contract, something he could justify to you and to himself. Tessa blinked hard, trying to keep the world in focus. He didn't need a wife, did he? No, Mrs. Patterson said calmly. He needed a reason to take care of you without you running away. Silence settled over the kitchen table, thick and heavy. Tessa let out a shaky breath. He's been watching me for 2 years, not in a creepy way, Mrs. Patterson said quickly. In his way, from a distance, through your work, through the reports, through little things, like your favorite color, your coffee order, the way you talk about your mother. Tessa's eyes burned. He knew all that before I even walked into his office for the first time. Yes, and he just pretended I was some stranger sitting in front of him with a contract. Mr. Frost is a very intelligent man, the housekeeper said gently. Emotionally, however, he is still a little boy watching his mother die because they couldn't afford the right medicine. The air left Tessa's lungs. His mother? Mrs. Patterson nodded. She died when he was 12. They didn't have the money. He watched her slip away, powerless to stop it. I wasn't here yet, but I've heard the story from the early staff. That's why he built everything he has, to never feel that helpless again. Tessa put a hand over her mouth. He's kept the world at arm's length ever since, Mrs. Patterson continued. And then you appeared, this woman who turned pain into art, who worked herself half to death for her mother, who still found a way to smile. Of course he was drawn to you. Tessa stared at the table, vision blurring. So this entire time, I thought I was the one sacrificing everything, the desperate one who made a cold bargain with a cold man. And he, Mrs. Patterson said softly, was the man who went against everything he'd built around himself, just to stand close enough to be allowed to care. Tessa swallowed hard. Why didn't he just tell me? Because he was afraid you'd think he was obsessive, Mrs. Patterson said simply. Afraid you'd run, afraid you'd look at him the way people once did when he was poor and powerless, like he was not enough, or too much, or both. Tessa swiped at her eyes, angry tears escaping anyway. He is a billionaire who terrifies boardrooms. How is he still afraid? Fear doesn't check bank balances, dear, the older woman replied. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. What do I do with this? Tessa whispered. He's been in love with me from a distance for years, and I didn't know. I married him thinking it was a transaction. He watched me thinking it was the only way he was allowed to love me. Mrs. Patterson gave her a long, kind look. You do what you've always done. You face what's in front of you with your whole heart. Whether you stay, whether you go, whether you forgive him or not, that's your choice. But he deserves at least once to be seen clearly. Tessa nodded slowly. She already knew what she had to do. She found him in his study. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light spilling into the hallway. Her heart jackamed as she stood there, hand hovering over the wood, gathering the courage to push it open. Finally she did. He was at his desk, still in his shirt and tie, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. The lamplight threw shadows across his face, making his expression look even more carved and controlled than usual. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes. Tessa, he said, it's late. You should be asleep. She took a few steps into the room and closed the door behind her. We need to talk. His posture straightened. Did something happen to your mother? No, she said. She's fine. This isn't about her. Then what? Why didn't you tell me? She interrupted. His brows drew together. Tell you what? That you knew me, she said, voice shaking. Before any of this. His expression didn't change at first. For a split second, she almost believed he'd pretend not to understand. Then something behind his eyes flinched. Tessa, he said slowly, what did Mrs. Patterson tell you? Enough, she replied. She told me about the gallery, and my paintings, and the fact that you've had my work hanging in your private study for 2 years. He said nothing. She told me you knew my favorite color before I walked into your office. My favorite coffee, that you knew my mother was sick, that I was drowning in bills, that I was running out of time. She took a step closer, tears burning in her eyes. You knew all of that, she whispered, and you still sat there behind your giant desk, pretending this was all just a convenient business arrangement. He looked away, jaw clenched. You needed money. I had it. The contract made it efficient. Don't do that, she said sharply. Don't hide behind efficiency. Not with me. Not now. Silence spread between them, like a crack in glass. He exhaled slowly. What do you want me to say, Tessa? The truth, she said, for once. No contract language, no deflections, just you. Why did you do it this way? Why marriage? Why me? He stood then, slowly, as though every movement cost him something. He came around the desk but didn't come close, keeping a safe distance between them. I didn't plan it, he began, the words halting at first. I walked into that gallery, by accident. I don't like accidents. I don't like surprise. But there you were, talking about your paintings, like they were pieces of your soul on the wall, laughing with strangers, explaining how color could make pain bearable. His gaze met hers, naked and unguarded, in a way she had never seen. I hadn't heard someone talk like that in a very long time, he said. Maybe ever. Her throat tightened. You looked happy, he continued quietly. Not because you had money, not because anyone important was there, just because you were doing what you loved. You lit up that room. He gave a humorless huff. I stood in the back and watched you for nearly an hour. I didn't mean to. I was late for my dinner, but I couldn't leave. So you had me investigated, she said. I had someone find your name, he corrected. Then your work, your classes, the cafe where you worked nights. I approved the purchase of 3 of your paintings. I had them brought here. I hung them where I would see them every day. He hesitated, his voice dropping lower. It was the one part of this house that didn't feel sterile. Her gaze flicked around the room, and for the first time, she noticed the canvases lining the far wall, her work, her style, her colors. She moved past him slowly, as though in a dream, and stopped in front of one of them. Her favorite piece from that first show, an abstract swirl of deep blues and gold, painted after a long night of crying in a cheap apartment. You kept this, she whispered. I kept all of them, he said. She traced the air near the canvas, afraid to touch it. Why didn't you just talk to me back then? He laughed softly, and it came out bitter. What would I have said? Hello, I'm a billionaire who doesn't know how to make small talk, but I'd like to buy your entire personality in painting form. She almost smiled, despite herself. He shook his head. You were bright, alive. I didn't want to ruin that by dragging you into my world. So instead you dragged me in with a marriage contract, she said. That was later, he replied. When I learned about your mother, the hospital, the bills, the timeline. Her eyes filled again. I know how it feels to watch someone you love die because you can't afford to save them, he said quietly. I swore I would never be in that position again. And when I saw your file, your name on that hospital report, the numbers in those estimates, he swallowed hard. I couldn't ignore it. So you decided to buy a year of my life, she said softly. I decided to give you money without you feeling like a beggar, he corrected. She flinched at the word, but he kept going, as if the dam had finally broken. You're proud, Tessa. You work yourself to the bone. You would have broken before you took a gift like that from me. You barely agreed to the contract as it was. She couldn't argue that.
I thought, he continued, that if I made it transactional, you'd accept. You'd get your mother's surgery. I'd get to keep you in my orbit for a while, under a label that made sense to both of us. Wife, she said. Yes, he replied. On paper, the ache in her chest deepened, and in reality, his eyes met hers. No shields now, no distance. There was fear there, and something much deeper. In reality, he said quietly, I fell in love with you in a gallery 2 years ago, and I've been trying very hard ever since not to scare you away with that fact. The words hung in the air like a confession in a cathedral. Her breath caught. He looked away first, jaw clenched. You were supposed to take the money, save your mother,
live your life, and leave after a year with a nice financial cushion and minimal emotional damage. I was not supposed to panic at the sight of a car almost hitting you. I was not supposed to care what dresses you wore, or who spoke to you, or how many times you smiled in a day. His voice thickened, just a little, and I certainly was not supposed to enjoy coming home early, because you would be there. Tessa felt her heart crack open. You could have told me, she said, voice trembling. We could have started differently. And what would you have done? He asked. If I had told you at our first meeting that I'd been watching your work, that I knew your coffee order, that I designed a room to match your favorite color, would you have signed that contract or run as far away from me as possible? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He was right. Back then, she would have been overwhelmed, suspicious, maybe even terrified. It would have felt like too much, too fast, from a man she didn't know. He saw that realization dawn in her expression. Exactly, he said quietly. I chose the option that gave you your mother and gave me time. To do what? She asked. He gave her a small, sad smile. To learn how to be someone worthy of standing next to you. Tessa blinked rapidly, tears spilling now, unstoppable. Idiot, she whispered. He stiffened slightly. Excuse me, you, she said, stepping closer. You enormous, brilliant, emotionally clueless idiot. There was a flicker of actual confusion in his eyes. I don't. You could have just talked to me, she said. You could have told me you were scared. You could have told me about your mother, about the gallery, about the paintings, about all of it. I wouldn't have run. I would have, I don't know, stood there and cried with you probably. His lips parted, but no sound came out. She took another step toward him, close now, close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders he never let anyone comment on. You keep acting like you're the only one who was afraid, she said softly. I was terrified too. I walked into a stranger's office and agreed to marry him for money. I moved into his house. I watched him walk past me every day like feelings were a software bug he didn't want. A shaky laugh escaped her, and somewhere between your silence, your coffee, the way you defended me at that dinner, and the way you looked today when that car almost hit me, I fell in love with you. It was his turn to freeze. Say that again, he said, barely audible. She swallowed, eyes wet, heart in her throat. I said I fell in love with you, Adrian, not with the contract, not with the house, with you, the man who hangs my paintings in his private study and panics when I step off a curb at the wrong time. Something broke in his expression then. The ice wasn't just cracked, it shattered. He took one step forward, then another. When he stopped, there was barely an inch between them. You shouldn't, he said, but his voice was wrecked. I am not. Don't finish that sentence, she whispered. I decide who I love. Remember. He stared at her like she was the last miracle left in the universe. Can I? He began, then shook his head, almost laughing at himself. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a stranger in my own house. You're doing fine, she whispered. Can I touch you? He asked. The question undid her. Yes, she breathed. His hand came up slowly, as if she were made of glass. He cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear he hadn't caused, but was absolutely tangled up in. For a second, he just stood there, looking at her. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't practiced. It didn't feel like something a powerful billionaire would do after years of experience. It felt honest. His lips were tentative at first, then desperate, then reverent all at once. She curled her fingers into the front of his shirt, kissing him back with every unanswered question, every quiet longing, every late-night moment she'd spent, wondering what it would feel like to be wanted by this man. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he confessed in a rough whisper, but I want to learn, with you, if you'll let me. Tessa laughed through fresh tears. You already started. You just didn't read the memo. His mouth curved into a small, real smile, the kind that made him look younger, softer, human. He pulled her into his arms properly then, holding her like he was memorizing the shape of her. And for the first time since the contract, the marriage stopped feeling like a transaction. It felt like the beginning of something real, something neither of them had planned, something neither of them wanted to lose. The morning after their midnight unraveling, the mansion felt different, lighter, warmer, almost alive. It wasn't that the furniture had changed, or the marble floors had softened, or the air conditioning had developed a personality. The house was the same. It was Adrian who wasn't. For the first time since the contract wedding, he didn't leave at dawn. Tessa woke early out of habit, expecting the usual cold emptiness of her suite, the usual hushed silence of a house with no heartbeat. But when she stepped into the hallway, she heard something she had never heard at that hour. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried footsteps. She tiptoed down the stairs and found him in the kitchen standing in front of the coffee maker, like he was trying to decipher an alien artifact. He looked painfully out of place among the cheerful mugs and lemon cookies. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're home." He turned, startled, and just like last night, that carefully constructed mask didn't return. Instead, there was a softness in his eyes, an openness that made her chest ache. "I thought," he said, clearing his throat, "that we could have breakfast." Her eyebrows rose. "You? In the kitchen? Yes, you know food is made here, right? Real food, with ingredients. I am aware, and you're not allergic to warmth or domestic settings." He blinked slowly, almost offended. "I'm not allergic to kitchens. Could have fooled me." His lips twitched, the closest thing she'd seen to a morning smile. "I can make coffee," he said. "That's adorable," she murmured. His ears turned faintly red. He made her coffee. It was terrible. Not poison bad, but deeply confused, like the machine had suffered an existential crisis halfway through brewing. She took one sip and tried not to grimace. "Wow, this is bold, and smoky, and chewy." He froze. "Chewy. I think the coffee beans are still emotionally attached to each other." He took the mug from her hands and tasted it. The look of sheer betrayal on his face nearly made her spit out laughing. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "You're adorable." "No."
Yes. He set the mug down firmly. "Mrs. Patterson will handle this." "Of course she will," Tessa said. "But I appreciate the effort." He looked at her then, really looked, and something warm flickered between them again. This time she didn't look away. The shift continued through the day. He followed her to the garden, not hovering, not intruding, just there, sitting on the edge of the stone bench, jacket off, sleeves rolled, watching her paint as if the act itself was a privilege he had longed for. She felt his gaze before she saw it. She always did. "You don't have to sit here all day," she said without turning. "I know. You have meetings." "Yes." "And work." "Yes." "And an empire to run." "Correct." She dipped her brush into a soft blue and glanced over her shoulder. "But you're still here." He stared back, unflinching. "Yes." Her heart did a slow, dangerous somersault. The small gestures came first, subtle enough to pretend she didn't notice, powerful enough that she absolutely did. He started coming home earlier, not once or twice, consistently. He stopped sitting at the opposite end of the dining table. The first night he sat across from her instead of 20 feet away, she nearly dropped her fork. He spoke more, still concise, still controlled, but real conversations about her art, about her mother's progress, about things he had never shared with anyone. She learned he hated thunderstorms because they reminded him of the night his mother collapsed. He learned she slept with the window cracked open because silence made her anxious. He listened. She teased. He pretended not to enjoy being teased.
She pretended not to enjoy being listened to. Love didn't rush in with fireworks. It seeped in through the cracks, gentle and persistent. The biggest surprise came a week later. "Tessa," he said one afternoon, "there's something I want to show you." He led her down a hallway she'd never explored, the West Wing, quiet and usually locked. At the end stood a set of double doors. He opened them slowly and stepped aside. Tessa gasped. It was an art studio, not a room, not a corner, a full studio. Sunlight poured in from wide skylights, illuminating tables lined with brushes, canvases of different sizes, shelves filled with every type of paint imaginable, natural light bulbs, perfect for working after sunset, a clean sink for washing tools, a soft rug beneath the easel to ease her feet. Everything she had ever wanted, everything she had never been able to afford. Adrian," she whispered. "This is—" He stood stiffly beside her, as if bracing for her reaction. "I asked a friend in the art community for advice. He sent consultants. They said this layout would be best for your style." "My style?" she echoed, turning to him. "Yes." She blinked hard, overwhelmed. "You did all of this for me." His jaw flexed. "It is inadequate, but it is a start." She laughed, a soft, watery sound, and walked straight into him, arms wrapping around his waist. He stiffened. Then slowly, he relaxed and held her back. "You're unbelievable," she whispered into his chest. "I hope so," he said quietly. Her mother's health improved dramatically. The day she was discharged, Adrian insisted on accompanying them home. The older woman fussed, claiming she didn't want to be a bother, but he was unmoved. Tessa watched them from across the room, Adrian carrying her mother's bag, listening attentively as she lectured him about the importance of eating breakfast. "Does he eat enough?" her mother whispered dramatically to Tessa. "He looks like a man who forgets to nourish himself." "Constantly," Tessa whispered back. Her mother marched up to Adrian with surprising authority. "Young man, do you eat in the morning?" He blinked. "Sometimes. Not good enough. Breakfast is important." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know how to cook?" "No, ma'am." "Then let my daughter feed you. She cooks well." Tessa choked. Adrian glanced at her, eyes flicking with something wickedly close to amusement. "Yes, ma'am," he repeated. Her mother left satisfied. Tessa left flustered. Adrian left victorious. A few days after that, Adrian met Noah properly for the first time, not as a contract requirement, but as family. He brought tickets to Noah's favorite team's basketball game. Noah's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "You got seats this close?" "Closer," Adrian said calmly. "These are courtside." "Bro," Noah whispered reverently. "I could hug a player from here." "That is not advisable," Adrian said immediately. Tessa snorted. During the game, Noah leaned toward his sister. "He's not what you described at all." Tessa frowned. "What do you mean?" "You said he was an ice sculpture that occasionally blinked." "I did not say that." "That's exactly what you said." Adrian turned slightly. "What did she say?" "Nothing," Tessa said quickly. Noah ignored her. "But look at him now. He smiles when you talk. He looks at you like you hung the moon." Adrian's head snapped toward the teenager, eyes wide. Then slowly, he smiled. Actually smiled. Tessa's breath caught. "He's right," Adrian said softly, turning back to her. Her heart nearly left her body. Nights changed too. They didn't sleep in the same room yet, but the space between them grew thinner every evening. Some nights he walked her to her door and lingered as though he didn't want to leave. Some nights she waited for the sound of his footsteps in the hall. Some nights their hands brushed accidentally and neither pulled away. Slowly, deliberately, he let her in, and slowly, dangerously, she let him. Love had begun in whispered confessions and midnight truth. Now it was blooming in the light, quiet, steady, beautiful, but hovering just beyond their peace was the contract. Ticking, counting, waiting, because time was running out and the year they had agreed to was almost over. What came next? Neither of them had spoken aloud. Not yet, but it was coming. The closer they drifted toward the end of the one-year contract, the more the mansion seemed to change shape around them, as if the walls themselves sensed what neither Tessa nor Adrian dared to say. It wasn't sudden or dramatic or marked by some grand declaration. It was gradual, the way dawn slips in without asking permission. One morning blurred into another until their routines intertwined almost accidentally. Almost. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian learned the meaning of slowing down. He still worked. Of course he worked, because if he stopped, the world might assume he had been replaced by a malfunctioning clone. But now there were boundaries, invisible ones Tessa didn't even know she'd set. He started ending meetings early, deleting appointments he didn't need, ignoring calls during dinner, letting his phone stay silent when she was near. He still didn't understand fun, but he understood peace, and peace had begun to look suspiciously like her. In the evenings they fell into a rhythm neither had planned. Tessa painted in her new studio while he worked quietly at the corner desk he'd installed, not to supervise her, but simply to be close. It was gentle, unspoken companionship, no demands, no pressure, just two people breathing in the same space, letting the air between them soften. Some nights she hummed while she worked, and he would lift his head, watching her like she was the only source of music he had ever recognized. Some nights he asked questions he'd never asked anyone, about color, emotions, brushstrokes, how she knew when a painting was finished. She teased him gently that his questions sounded like investigative interviews. He replied that she answered like poetry. She told him that was the nicest thing he'd ever said. He told her he'd said nicer things, not out loud, of course. Her mother took to Adrian far too quickly for Tessa's comfort. Every visit turned into unsolicited bonding. He brought flowers once, simple wildflowers he picked on his morning run. Not expensive orchids, not roses. Something soft, something real. Her mother held them to her chest and whispered, "You're keeping this one." Tessa nearly choked. At first she tried to deny it, but her mother simply raised an eyebrow the way mothers do when they know their children are in love before their children do. Noah's involvement didn't help either. He loved Adrian, he admired Adrian, he teased Adrian, and Adrian, stoic, cold, untouchable Adrian, tolerated every bit of it, like a man secretly craving the family he didn't know how to admit he wanted. Sometimes, after dinner, Noah dragged Adrian to the living room for basketball highlights, explaining every play with dramatic commentary. Adrian pretended to understand half of it, nodding gravely as if Noah were presenting national security briefings. Tessa would peek in from the hallway and catch a sight she thought she'd never see. The Ice King, sitting on the couch, shoulders relaxed, sleeves rolled, laughing softly at something human, something ordinary, something warm. She held the doorframe and let her heart crack wide open. One evening she found something unexpected, an invitation. A gallery wanted to feature her work, her name, her art. It felt unreal, so unreal she thought it might be a mistake. She stared at the letter for a full 10 minutes before she remembered she should breathe. When she showed Adrian, she half expected him to give her polite encouragement. Maybe professional praise, something measured. Instead, warmth lit his eyes like someone had turned on a hidden star behind them. "You deserve this," he said, not as a formality, not as a compliment, as truth, and he added softly, "I already confirmed with the curator." Her breath caught. "You did?" He looked almost nervous. "I wanted it to be right, for you." Her vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let her emotions spill. He reached for her hand, not formally, not distantly, not accidentally. He simply held it, and then came the moment she didn't know she'd been waiting for. The night he kissed her arm, not her lips, not her cheek, her arm. A gesture so gentle, so reverent, she felt it all the way to her spine. She had been painting, lost in colors, sleeves pushed to her elbows. When she stepped back to view her work, he came to stand beside her. Close, far too close to pretend it was accidental. He traced a finger down a streak of paint on her forearm, smiling the faintest, softest smile. "You have a talent for beauty," he murmured, eyes lingering on her, not the painting. and you don't even notice." Before she could respond, he lifted her arm and slowly, carefully pressed his lips to her skin. Her breath left her completely. The world stilled. He didn't apologize. He didn't retreat. He didn't pretend it was accidental. He simply looked at her with something raw, something vulnerable, something aching with everything he had never said. She didn't kiss him back, not because she didn't want to, but because the moment was so delicate that touching it might break it. She stood still, absorbing it, letting it settle into the quiet places of her heart. That was the moment she knew. She didn't just care for him, she loved him, deeply, dangerously, hopelessly, and he loved her too, whether he said it aloud or not. But love didn't erase reality. The contract still existed. The year was still ticking away. And even with all the warmth, all the soft exchanges, all the quiet affection, neither dared mention the deadline. Neither dared assume, neither dared risk breaking what had finally begun to flourish. Every morning, every shared smile, every delicate touch carried the same unspoken question. What happens when the year ends? The mansion felt it. Mrs. Patterson felt it. Her mother felt it. Noah definitely felt it. And in the darkest hours of the night, when the mansion went quiet, Tessa felt it the most, because she wasn't sure which would hurt more, that he might not want her forever, or that he did. On a quiet Thursday evening, Adrian appeared in the doorway of her art studio, hands in his pockets, eyes soft in a way they had never been before. The room smelled like turpentine and jasmine, two scents he had slowly come to associate with home. "Tessa," he said gently, "come with me." She wiped her hands, tied her paint-stained hair into a knot, and followed him down the staircase. He didn't explain where they were going, and she didn't ask. She trusted him now, fully, completely, frighteningly. Outside, a black car waited. She slid in beside him, the warmth of his arm brushing hers, sending a familiar flutter through her ribs. The city passed in soft streaks of gold as they drove, but he barely looked out the window. His gaze kept drifting to her, quick glances, stolen seconds, as if making sure she was still there. He was nervous. When the car stopped, she looked out and froze. It was the gallery. The same small local gallery where she had once displayed her first paintings, the ones he had secretly purchased. The place where he had seen her before she ever knew he existed. The lights were off. The street quiet, only the faint glow from the moon washed over the entrance. "It's closed," she said. He inhaled deeply. "Not tonight." He unlocked the door with a key she didn't know he had. Inside, soft lights flickered to life, revealing the familiar white walls and polished floors. The air smelled like wood varnish and memory. Her feet carried her forward instinctively. She touched the smooth wall where her paintings had once hung, feeling a wave of nostalgia wash over her. So much had changed since then. She had changed. He had changed. Everything had changed. Adrian stood behind her, watching. "This is where I first saw you," he said quietly. "You were explaining the inspiration behind a painting to a couple who didn't understand a word you said. You were so alive, so bright. You looked at your art the way some people look at the person they love." She smiled softly. "I remember that night." He exhaled shakily. "It was the first time in years I felt something warm." Her heart tightened. He was shaking, barely but enough for her to notice. He walked to the center of the room, turned to face her, and reached into his coat pocket, a small velvet box. Her breath hitched. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't performing. He wasn't hiding behind contracts or logic or carefully constructed distance. He was trembling like a man standing on the edge of everything he had ever feared. "Tessa," he whispered, "I asked you to marry me once." She swallowed. "I remember. It was the wrong way, the wrong reason, the wrong man." His voice cracked. "I hid behind rules because I was terrified of losing you before I even had you." She took a step toward him. He took one toward her. He opened the velvet box. Inside was the simplest, most beautiful ring she had ever seen. He dropped to one knee. "Tessa," he said again, his voice breaking, "I don't want a year. I don't want a contract. I don't want a condition. I want a life with you. Only you. Always you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing in front of your painting," he continued. "I'm asking you again, not as a businessman, not as a hedge against loneliness, but as a man who—" A door slammed at the back of the building. Both of them froze. Footsteps echoed in the dark hallway. Slow, Deliberate, coming closer, Adrian rose immediately, slipping the ring box into his fist. "Tessa," he said quietly, "stay behind me." The footsteps grew louder. A shadow moved across the back wall. Then the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room.